Hello, everyone. We'll be getting started in about 10 minutes. If you'd like to participate in our iClicker questions today, we've put the course information on the screen for you, and also the course link is in the chat box, so you can click that link and sign in with your instructor email and password, or you can create a new iClicker account. For the best experience, we do recommend watching the webinar on your computer and using your mobile device to participate in iClicker. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We will be getting started in approximately 5 minutes from now. So while you're waiting, if you would like to participate in our iClicker questions throughout the webinar, we've put the course information on the screen, and the course link is also in your chat or questions panel. You can use your instructor email and password to log in or create a new iClicker account if you don't have one yet. For the best experience, we do recommend watching the webinar using your computer and then participating in iClicker using your mobile device. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. We'll be getting started in a couple more minutes. While you're waiting, if you'd like to participate in our iClicker questions, we have put the course information on the screen. We've also put the course link in your chat or questions panel, so you can use your instructor email and password to log in, or you can create a new account if you don't have one yet. For the best experience, we do recommend watching the webinar using your computer and participating in our iClicker questions using your mobile device. Welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for our webinar, Helping Students Study Smarter. Once again, if you're just joining us now, we have put our course information on the screen and in the questions panel also. So if you already have an instructor account with iClicker, you can go ahead and use your instructor email and password to log in. For the best experience, we do recommend watching the webinar with your computer and responding to iClicker questions with your mobile device. But that participation part is totally optional. Just feel free to watch the webinar if you wish. A couple more announcements before we start the presentation. We have muted everyone to keep out background noise, but we do want to hear from you. If you'd like to ask us a question or give us any feedback, feel free to type it into the questions panel on your screen. We will be monitoring the questions as they come in, but we'll also be saving some for the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. If we don't get to your question in the webinar, we'll be sure to follow up with you by email. I also wanted to let you know that we are recording the webinar and we'll email you a link to the recording and the slide deck within the next few days. That's it for housekeeping. So with that, my name is Lindsay Thomas and I am the Training and Documentation Manager here at iClicker. I am very excited to introduce today's presenter, Natalie Dougal, who is our amazing training specialist and faculty advocate. Over to you, Natalie.
Thank you, Lindsay. It's always so fun to do these. I'm going to turn off our cameras right now so that we can get more of the screen. So I hope everybody's having a great day, and excited to talk to you all about helping students study smarter with iClicker. So today what we're going to cover is we're going to do a tour of the iClicker student app, and more specifically, we're going to drill down into iClicker's study tools. This is a feature that is included for your students in the iClicker app that you may or may not have played with, you may or may not be aware of, but we wanted to show you what's available to your students through iClicker. And then we're going to get into writing polling questions specifically for your students to be able to study. So we're going to talk about some considerations that you're going to want to take with the iClicker Cloud software. We're going to talk about question content, and we'll talk a little bit about slide design. So we'll also end our session with some question and answer. So if you came to this webinar with a burning question about iClicker, throw that into our chat right now. I know that when I come someplace with a question that I always kind of have that question at the back of my mind, and sometimes it keeps me from focusing. So hit us with your questions. We really want to know what you're thinking. And I think the question and answer section of these webinars is kind of our favorite. A lot of times we get ideas for the next webinar just from the question and answer section. So please hit us with those questions. But before we get into the student app, I just want to know how many of you have actually been able to play with it and have spent the time playing with the iClicker student app. So I'm just asking a quick yes or no question. Have you played with the iClicker student app? So if you haven't joined our session yet, the course join information is over here, but you can also use the new quick join feature through the chat, which, all right, we've got 4 responses. Let me see how many attendees I have right now. I'm gonna look through the instructor app. Okay. All right, I'm gonna give a few more seconds because people are still joining the course. All right, let's go ahead and stop it. All right, let's see how many people have played with it. All right, so about 5 people have played with it, and only one of our friends has not played with the student app yet. So I'm really glad that you all are diving in and using the tools that your students have at their disposal. You'd be surprised how often instructors only look at it from the instructor side of things. So it's really great that you all are playing with the iClicker student app. So this is our iClicker student. We have students who really do love iClicker. They love when it's used well. And so we're going to talk about having a traditional sophomore who seeks out instructors who use polling. You know, when she was in high school, her high school teachers were using Kahoot, and she liked that, but she didn't like how competitive it was. And when she got to college, she found iClicker and went, oh my gosh, I really, really like iClicker. So she's seeking out instructors who actually use polling and specifically use iClicker. So she's enrolled in 6 classes, 3 of which use iClicker. So let's go ahead and check out her account, which I already had her logged in. Here we go. Just takes a moment. So she's got a macroeconomics class, an introduction to art history, and a critical thinking course. And when a student pays for an iClicker subscription, it's nice to remember that it's an all-you-can-eat affair. So she only has to pay once to be able to use it in as many classes as possible. So this is something where you want to be talking to your colleagues about what they're using as their polling software and really try and get unified on the same solution so that students' dollars are being spent wisely. All right, so let's dive into her econ class right here. And you'll see that this is the home screen that she comes to, the statistics screen. On the home screen, she can get a really brief overview of how she's doing overall in the class and how her attendance is overall. If she clicks on her score, she can get a little bit more information. And what's nice down here is she gets this little graph where she can see how well she did on day to day. She can see that on the 4th and the 8th, she did really, really well. She can see that on the 10th, she didn't earn any points. You know, maybe this was one of those days where she attended in body, but not in spirit. And then she can also see, hey, you know, on March 11th, I only got 67% of them right. Maybe this is a day that I need to go into and I need to study more. So this gives students a really nice overview of their performance. And then in the attendance section, if they click on it, they get this really great little calendar right here where they can see at a glance how many classes they've attended and how many classes they've missed. So this is one of those things where when you have students who come up to you and they say, hey, can I miss class on Tuesday? You can go and say, I don't know, will you look at your attendance record? You're able to miss 2 classes this term. According to, you know, the class policies, are you able to miss class or not? And really put it back in their court where they need to be self-sufficient and kind of learn how to manage that themselves. So this is the statistics area. In the next area, they have their class history section. So this is where students find their polling questions, and they can also drill down more into their attendance. So she can see here that on the 9th, she missed a poll. and that she didn't check in for attendance, and this is what she missed on that day in class. So again, if you have a student who comes up to you and says, hey, I was out of class on Thursday, did I miss anything? Which is always a funny question. And you can be as sarcastic as you want or not when a student asks that, but it's nice to say, yeah, get the notes from somebody else, and also go into iClicker and make sure you study the polling questions that we missed. If she goes and she clicks on a particular session, she can go and see the different questions that she was asked that day. Um, in the assignments section, she can go and she can see if she has any assignments right here. You can see her instructor has asked for some midterm feedback and she's got it in progress. So she can see that in her assignment section. And then lastly, she has her study tools section, and this is what we'll be talking about today. So right now our student doesn't have any questions in her study tools pack yet. She needs to go back to class history and click on one of her sessions to start adding questions in. So what students do is they go into their class history and they mark which questions they want to study, because something that our students experience is instructors use iClicker for a wide variety of reasons. We might have an instructor who uses iClicker to make a decision about when a paper is due, and then uses it to do a vocabulary drilling exercise, and then lastly uses it just to get feedback on overall lesson plans. So this is really great that the student can go through individually and really figure out which questions they want to study. So by simply marking them in the corner right here, the student's able to add them to their study tools. And if they go into study tools, they now have the option to either use flashcards or to challenge themselves with a practice test. So if they click on flashcards, they're able to see the question that was asked in class, and then they're able to flip it over and see the answer. So this was a targeted question where the instructor asked them to pick a point on this chart to make the response. And so when the student flips it over, they get this nice little heat map where they can remember where this was on the chart. And something that I find really interesting about the use of flashcards, especially iClicker flashcards, is when a student is using flashcards that they made themselves, they are something that I thought of as very efficient. They are highly recommended. Flashcards are one of those mainstays of studying that have been proven by research again and again to work. But when a student makes a flashcard on their own, they don't really have a memory event with that flashcard. As opposed to when they use flashcards from iClicker, they're actually remembering that time when you had this big, huge slide up on the screen in class and you spent maybe 15 minutes talking about this concept. So they're not just studying this concept, but they're actually reaching back in their memory to that class experience. And so that's one of those things that when you're thinking about encouraging students to use iClicker study tools, you're not just asking them to review flashcards in a traditional sense, but you're asking them to review class moments, which I think is really powerful. So depending on how the question was asked, this was a targeted question, that'll affect what's on the back of the card. And this was just a quick multiple choice question. So those are flashcards. If the student goes into practice tests, they have to be a little bit more narrow in how they challenge themselves. And when we look at the research around studying, flashcards are one of those techniques that students use that are really efficient. One of the problems with flashcards are students tend to turn the card over too early to give themselves the answer. And the second issue that students run into is they tend to assume mastery of the concept much earlier than they actually have it. And so they will take questions out of their flashcard pack and say, oh, I understand this, and they won't study it enough. So one of the things that a practice test does instead is it makes it so that the student has to be a little bit more honest about answering. So here you can see the student has to touch on the question and tap the image to answer here, because this was a targeted question. I'm going to go and put it here and click send. And the student can see, hey, my answer is correct. I got that one right. And so the student isn't just flipping over the card at this point, they're getting a more rigid test of their skills. All right, they click next question. And then here, how is demand different from wants or needs? We're going to say A. Oh, incorrect. And the student can see, hey, I missed that one. I need to go back and study that one again. When the student clicks finished, they're given the option to either study all of their questions or they can just study the questions that they missed. And then they have to just click the practice test. Down here, they can manage their questions and they can take questions in and out of their flashcard packs as they'd want to. As students go along the semester, they're going to get a bigger and bigger flashcard pack. And one of the things that sometimes instructors think, oh, you should only study a few flashcards at a time. Actually, the more the merrier. Having a nice fat stack of flashcards and practice tests with a huge variety of questions tends to be more effective for learning for students than just having a few small flashcard packs that have really narrow topics and subjects. That tends to be a better use of their time. So that was their econ class. If they go back into their class list, they can then go into their art history class. And again, they get the same score and attendance information at the beginning. I've already marked some questions for study tools here, so I'm just going to hop right over there. And here again, the student is able to study flashcards. And in our history class, you can imagine this is a really great way to get students familiar with a wide variety of different art styles, art information, artists, all sorts of things. So what year did Pablo Picasso complete Guernica? 1937. You can ask about this sculpture and who was the artist. And then down here is an example of a target question where they want to identify a Basquiat painting. And again, they get that nice target right there, which gets the student interacting with the information in a really dynamic way. And then she has one more class, which is an English 103 critical thinking class. And she would love to use study tools in this class, but their instructor does not share images with the class. And if you as an instructor don't share images with the class, the student isn't able to study the image on the front of the flashcard. And so she's not able to take advantage of study tools in that class. So that is our iClicker student who is using study tools a whole heck of a lot in her class. And she's getting a lot of great information out of it. So I want to ask, for each hour of class time spent weekly, how many hours should a student spend studying? And this is a calculation that colleges use. I'm going to put on multiple choice. So this is how colleges calculate what qualifies as a full-time student. So for each hour of time that a student is on campus, they're going to spend a certain amount of time doing homework and studying. So what is that calculation? Okay. All right, I'm going to wait till the 30, and then I'm going to go ahead and stop it. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at our results. All right, so we have one at 1 hour, one at 2 hours, and one at 3 hours. So there's two correct answers here depending on your institution. Institutions vary between 2 hours and 3 hours for studying. So if you have a student who's going to class for 15 hours a week, by this calculation with 2 hours per 1 hour in the classroom, that means that they would be studying 30 hours a week for a total of 45 hours. Whereas here, they would be studying for 45 hours. If they were studying for 3 hours for each hour in class, which I hear some of you gently chuckling out there at the thought of students studying 45 hours, though there are some students who really do study, our most competitive A students, who really do study at those rates. Most students, though, we know are not spending that much time outside of class studying for class. So let's talk about how we can encourage our students to study more and study better. Um, So one thing that we want to do when we're thinking about the use of study tools in iClicker is we want to think about sharing images with students. So we saw what happened. If you in course settings, you're not sharing images with students, they're not going to be able to use these as flashcards as practice tests. So make sure in the course settings that you are sharing images with students. And this is the default setting in classes. So if you haven't messed with this setting, you don't need to worry about it, but it might be something you want to check on if you're going to be encouraging your students to use study tools. You want to make sure that you grade your questions. The only way for students to get a correct answer to study on the back of those flashcards or in that practice test is for you to go ahead and grade your questions. And maybe you don't grade your questions in class when you're asking them of your students. Maybe that's not part of your process. You can always go to iClicker.com, log in as an instructor, and you can grade your questions for your students later, maybe back when you're in your office, so that they have those correct answers to study. You want to make sure that you're not asking more than one question per slide. Sometimes we have instructors who will kind of load up one slide with all of their iClicker questions for the sake of efficiency. But for the sake of study tools, we really want to break up those questions and make sure that we just have one per slide. You also want to think about mixing up multiple choice and short answer questions. So for example, right over here, it would be a lot easier for the student to have had a multiple choice question here. But instead, the instructor chose to use it as a short answer, not just to up the challenge, but to also make sure that when the student is studying this answer, they're studying the complete answer instead of just an A or a B. So this correct answer was put into the other or best answer section. And when you put something into that other and best section because all of your students forgot the correct answer, that's going to be the one that shows up on the back of the card. So for you as the instructor, you're always able to control through the software what your students ultimately study. So how many hours per week should your students be studying for your class weekly? So I'm just going to do this as a numeric question. Go ahead and respond. So maybe when you think about that ratio, you think to yourself, well, that's really not enough hours to study for my class. Or maybe you're thinking, I teach a 3-unit class, but I can't imagine my students spending 9 hours a week studying for my class. Okay. And I'm going to stop it at 35. Okay, let's look at the results. All right, 2.5, an hour, 2 hours, 8 hours, 6 hours, 9 hours. We're all over the map on this one. And that's probably because we've got some instructors who are probably teaching classes that are just 1 credit hour. Maybe we have someone who's teaching something that's 3 credit hours. If you're asking your students to study for 9 hours a week, you want to be thinking, how am I directing them to study? Because what we find through the research is that just because a student is studying longer, it doesn't mean they're studying better. If they're studying longer, they might be participating in study habits that aren't particularly helpful to them, like reading and rereading the same section of a textbook over and over again, or cramming. So you want to be thinking about how you're instructing your students to study. And, again, with study tools, you can kind of direct them. So you also want to be thinking about question content. When you're asking polling questions, really think about asking conceptual why and how questions, not just questions that have one narrow correct answer. When students study those as flashcards, they're actually very helpful to them. We might be thinking, oh, if it's a flashcard, it really has to be that narrow. There's only one right correct answer. But that just isn't how the research bears out. You want to practice interleaving when possible. So interleaving is the practice of mixing topics and question types to improve learning. So again, you might be thinking, okay, I'm just going to use iClicker to emphasize vocabulary, and that's all I'm going to use iClicker for. That's all I'm going to ask them. Um, And, it's helpful to ask them about vocabulary, but if you can bring in other topics and you can especially bring in other subjects that are related to your subject, that really does improve learning for your students. You also want to encourage, again, your students to have those big flashcard packs where they're learning across class sessions instead of just looking at one class session at a time, simply because by bringing in those different days and those different class moments, they're able to improve their learning outcomes. And then you want to draw iClicker questions from your formal assessments. This is one of those things that really can be frustrating for students is when there's not a connection between what they're asked for iClicker and what they get asked on quizzes and tests. Because for students, what they think is, okay, I'm having kind of these mini assessments with iClicker. They must be connected to my major assessments in this class. And when there's a breakdown between those two things, the students become very frustrated with both iClicker and their formal assessments. So something that can be really simple to do is to look at old exams and to say to your students, hey, here are the 3 questions that students missed the most on the final exam last year. Why did so many people miss these questions? And again, you can ask a conceptual question about something that has one clear right answer and really get your students grappling with that. And they feel really motivated because they know, hey, this is coming off the final exam. I really want to figure out this puzzle before I'm faced with the final exam. Okay, so now we're talking about reality. How many hours per week does the average full-time student spend studying? So for this one, I'm going to ask it as a short answer, but I'm just going to ask you all to answer A, B, C, D, or E. And I'll show you in a moment why I'm asking for that. So do students spend between 5 and 10 hours studying, 10 to 15, 15 to 20, 20 to 25, 25 to 30? And again, just put in A, B, C, D, or E. Okay, I'm going to go until the 30. Let's go ahead and stop it. Okay, and let's look at the results. All right, we've got a lot of people who are answering B, some A, one, 2 C's. We didn't have anybody go for E between 25 and 30 hours, which we've agreed is the minimum for a full-time student. So the actual answer is B. B is the correct answer, but I'm going to go ahead and put in another answer with the more correct answer, which is 14. The average student spends 14 hours per week studying. So I'm going to put in this number 14, and I'm also going to put a star by it. And by doing that, it makes sure that this is the answer that shows up on the back of the card. So I was still able to ask a multiple uh, choice question that went very quickly. And then I was also able to give more information for the back of that flashcard for students so it would have the most correct answer on the back. So you also want to be thinking about slide design when you're optimizing your polling sessions for use with study tools. So you want to think, what do my slides look like on student phones? Now, I'm not saying that you should be optimizing every single question that you ask your students to be looked at on a tiny little phone. Sometimes you have to have a slide with a complicated graph or have a lot of text. But it's also really nice that students can use their phone as a studying device. And again, you're taking this device that's really important to them, that they use all the time throughout their life, and you're turning it into a studying device. So thinking about what things look like on your students' phones is really important. And again, as an instructor, you can always log in to iClicker as a student with your instructor credentials, and you can see what your questions look like before passing them on to your students. Oh, things got messed up with my animations. Well, we want to keep ADA accessibility central, and I'm kind of laughing at this because this is to have your animations unroll like this is not ADA accessible. But we want to think about how slide font and color interact. You can see that for this presentation, I'm just using black on white. I'm making sure that my font is nice and big. The bigger the font, the better. And I'm also using a sans serif font. These three kind of very simple points are the very basics of ADA accessibility. And I'm not holding myself up as an ADA accessibility expert. That's something you really want to turn to your institution about. But I just love the fact that anytime that you think about accessibility, you're making it so that it's more accessible to absolutely everyone, not just students with special needs. You also want to include simple graphics in your slides when it's appropriate to trigger the picture superiority effect. So when we look at human memory and we look at how we remember things, we tend to remember things better with an image attached to it than without. And we tend to remember images much better than we remember text. And so if you can combine a image with text, it makes it easier for students to remember the concept. And so if you're talking about an individual, maybe you have a very simple illustration of that individual. If you're talking about a place, you have a very simple map. Including charts and graphs also can be very, very helpful. So, how do you, as an instructor, recommend that your students study? Let's go ahead and turn on short answer for this one. So, what actual methods do you tell your students to use? Are you telling them, hey, use flashcards? Are you telling them to use study groups, visit tutoring? Uh, what sort of recommendations do you give to them? Do you talk with them about spacing? Okay. 4 or 5 responses. So these are coming in slower because they're short answer. But also, it's interesting to think about how often do we literally instruct students on how to study. We might not be taking that time. And I'm going to let this go until the 1 minute mark. All right, what did people have to say? Practice online homework, study groups, word problems, read the chapter, relive notes. I'm sure this was supposed to be study groups, designated times, practice, 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 teaching a peer about the subject. So we got really great ideas about how to study. Um, Overall, students could use more instruction on how to study. They often have come from high schools where memorization was the name of the game. And when they get to college, one of the reasons why students may be studying less and less as they go along is because if you get to college and you try and memorize everything, you're going to have a real bad time. Whereas if you kind of understand, okay, this is stuff that I need to memorize, this is stuff I need to be familiar with, this is stuff I need to understand from um, a conceptual side, those things are all really important for students to understand, but it's also really important for them to understand there are many different ways to study. As you talk to your students and give them more instruction on how to study, we really want you to be telling your students about iClicker study tools. Just because students have an iClicker subscription, it doesn't mean that they've gone and played with the app any more than they absolutely have to. So we have a lot of resources that we've made for students. Specifically, we have a study tools video and a support article that we have that are for students specifically, that if you want, you can take and you can turn around and send to your students and say, hey, I don't know if you're aware of this, but you can use study tools to study, and this is how you do it. So we have those articles for you as support. All right, so now we're to our favorite part, questions and comments. Lindsay, what have we got going on?
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. That was really informative. So we have a couple of questions that have come in so far. First of all, do you happen to have any data on study hours for part-time students?
So I got my information from the National Survey of Student Engagement, and I didn't see anything for part-time students. So I just have full-time
Okay.
information.
Um, Another question. I've been hiding my question screenshots this whole semester so far, but can I go back in and change those settings so my students can take advantage of the study tools?
Absolutely. You can go back in and change it, and students will be able to see your responses again. It'll be great.
Perfect. Can I see which of my students are using flashcards or study tools?
Yeah, so we've had some instructors who, when we talk to them about study tools, they get really excited and they say, "This is great. I could assign my students so they have to do this for extra credit." Or, "Oh, I want to be able to see who's doing this so I can see who's really trying in my class." So study tools is a tool that is really for students, and students have privacy around it. We don't let instructors know how often or what students are doing with study tools because we really want to explicitly encourage students to study any way that they need to without worrying that they're going to be judged for how they're studying.
Great. Yeah, that's a good point. All right, next question. I teach asynchronously with iClicker's assignments feature. Can students use questions from assignments for studying?
So we have it on the roadmap that assignments are going to be usable in study tools soon. If you are not subscribed to the iClicker newsletter, I really want to encourage you to do that because we always are updating our users on what new features are coming out. So that'll be announced in our newsletter when assignments are usable in study tools. So make sure that you've signed up for the iClicker newsletter so that you're always aware of when we have new features for you and your students.
Great, thanks, Natalie. We've gotten a few questions about pricing. Can you just quickly go over for both faculty and students?
Okay, so iClicker is always free for instructors. For students, iClicker, if they buy it through the iTunes store or the Play Store, it'll be $15.99 for 6 months of access. And again, that's all you can eat. So if they're using it in 3 classes, it ends up being about $5 per class. We also have all kinds of bundles with Macmillan products so that if students are using a Macmillan textbook, they can get it bundled in for $5, which is a really great bargain. And then we have a few instances where iClicker is included. For example, if you're using one of our Achieve products, iClicker is included in Achieve for no additional cost. And then if you're using College Success textbook from Macmillan or you're using Developmental English, iClicker is also included for free. So
Yeah, and
make
there's
sure to,
also, yeah.
oh, you got one more?
No, I was just going to say there's always, yeah, departmental and institutional site license options.
Exactly, yes. So if you can get your whole department, or your institution all decided on the same iClicker solution, then it can come down to a very affordable site license, and then students don't have to worry about paying for it at all.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Next question. I really like the option to put in a best answer that students can study from, but I don't always have time to do that in class. Can I do it after class?
Yep, you can do it after class. Just go to iClicker.com, log in as an instructor, and then go to your class session history, and then you can just grade your questions. I did that for several of the questions in the demonstration today.
Okay, cool. And I haven't graded my questions all term so far. Can I go back and grade them now?
Yes, you can, and your students will be super appreciative. Um, Especially now we're at kind of that midterm time. That could be a really nice kind of a treat for your students to say, hey, you can go back and you can study all these sessions together, especially if the midterm is coming.
Perfect. Last question we have for now. Do you have any tips for, is there a way to arrange for and grade an essay question in iClicker?
So the closest that we have to an essay question is our short answer, and our short answer is 140 characters, which that's a tweet.
Yeah.
And tweets are not essays, which we have learned. So, it's not quite an essay question, but it's it's as much as a student is probably going to want to do on their phone. So that's something that you want to be thinking about when you ask these short answer questions. And also, you'll notice that when I asked short answer questions during this demonstration, that it became a slower polling activity. So if we're asking students to kind of write mini paragraphs, it makes polling a much slower activity in the class, which is not to say that we might not in the future come up with a longer short answer response. But right now, short answer is 140 characters, kind of to keep polling that kind of lighter assessment tool than a full mini essay, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and just to add to that, if you're looking for more robust sort of composition tools, then I would definitely recommend checking out Macmillan Learning's Achieve platform.
Yes.
All right, well, that's it for questions. So I just wanted to finish up by saying that in the next couple days, we'll be sending an email with a recording of this webinar and the slide deck to everyone who signed up. If you think of any additional questions later, just feel free to respond back to that email and then we'll get you the answers you need. I also just wanted to mention that today's webinar focused mostly on how your use of iClicker can benefit your students. But if you need help getting started with iClicker as an instructor, please feel free to visit iClicker.com and click on the Demos and Trainings button in the banner at the bottom of the page. All right, well, that's it. Thanks everyone for joining us today.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. This was fun.
Thanks, Natalie.
All right.